Hi, I wanted to do a follow-up on the COVID-19 Sweden doing it her way video that I posted last week and answer some questions that I saw in the comments of that video. Before I jump in real quick, as of April 14th in US, we see more and more green bubbles for the states where the trend is down. You could see the other videos to understand how we calculate the color indicator, and we can see that US is currently in green. You see that cases are trending down, more and more people are recovering, so overall things are getting better. I will do a separate video about that, but I'm pretty happy to see us in green, so I can't help myself but to share it with everybody. Now let's clear our country filter so that we can take a look at Sweden, and let's address a couple of points. The number one thing I wanted to address is that we are in business intelligence business, not in a reporting business. And the reporting business is an easy business. In the reporting business, all you need to do is answer the questions that you already know. So in the reporting business, the questions don't change very much, the answers might change, but the questions stay the same. In business intelligence business, the art of this business and art of this discipline is to know which questions to ask. Therefore, I'm not trying to go deep into political and medical issues of addressing this disease. I'm trying to take a look at the data that we have available and see if there's any insights that could be gleaned from that data set, compare country with other countries, and see if we might find something interesting that would get our creative juices going and perhaps help us ask some good questions. Most important observations of all is that Sweden is also in green. So over the last 5 days, on average, cases were dropping at 4.16%. Again, I'm not going to go in too much detail as to how Sweden is different in its strategy against fighting COVID-19 disease, but let's just say that they are somewhat an outlier. Sweden is somewhat an outlier in the way that crisis is being handled. Swedish economy has not been shut down, similar to how a lot of other developed countries have reacted as we're facing this pandemic. The other thing that's important to understand is that ultimately the way the viruses work is you either have a vaccine that is safe, widely available and implemented, or a population has herd immunity. And because the vaccines are not widely available yet, countries have made a choice to flatten the curve, which means that there's almost 100% possibility or a probability that the disease will come back again when the time is right for the disease to sprout its head again. Whereas in Sweden, because they are not implementing some of the measures that other countries are, Sweden has a much higher probability of developing the herd immunity in one swoop and not having to deal and risk facing this disease again in the fall and spring, fall of this year, 2020, and potentially spring of 2021. So what's really interesting for me, at least, is that we're seeing not as steep of a curve in Sweden of cases rising. So we see that it took Sweden, here on weekends we see cases drop sometime, but most likely Sweden peaked somewhere around early April, right? So now we see cases going again on the weekend. We see the drop. Cases went up a little bit, but most likely we can assume that the cases are going to be coming down from now on. And it looks like it took from Sweden somewhere starting from, let's say, March 8th 7th or 8th when they were getting 60-50 cases, but roughly a month to peak. Most of the time when I read about Sweden is being compared to Norway and Denmark. So if I click on Norway, we could see that Norway peaked there was a very steep curve of peaking, and then it took Norway a lot less to peak, right? And then Norway is pretty well on its way to completely eradicate, unless, and in fact, according to our forecasting calculation, if the rate of deceleration of cases stays the same, Norway can in 12 days see no new cases. Again, this is just for wave 1, because Norway has only gotten up to 1.2 thousand cases per 1 million. Who knows what's going to happen as subsequent waves come in later this year, early next year. We can also take a look at Denmark. Clearly there's some data quality issues with Denmark, but looks like for Denmark, the time to peak was roughly the same time that is taken in Sweden. So it took about 4 weeks, somewhere thereabouts, for the cases to peak. Again, keep in mind that if Sweden, given they chose a strategy, Sweden at the end of this will end up with most likely having a herd immunity, where large amount of population, there's different numbers, 80%, whatever the number is, the population overall will become very resistant for the subsequent waves of this disease. Whereas Norway, Denmark, US, frankly, the rest of the world, we don't really know what the fall will look like. One of the comments for the original video mentioned that these numbers are meaningless, and there is a good argument for it, and there is a good argument against it. I think it's pretty meaningless to compare Sweden with Norway and Denmark, and actually with any other country in some sense, because I will do another video on that. But if you look at the statistics and clustering of how countries behave with respect to mortality rates, it hardly seems like we're looking at the same disease, right? So when you're looking at France, UK, Belgium, Spain, and Italy, it seems like these countries are struggling with one type of a disease. You're looking at countries like Switzerland and Germany, in some way US, it looks like it's some sort of other disease. You're looking at countries like China, and that looks like it's a completely third type of a disease that has nothing to do with respect to its dynamic and other characteristics with the diseases that the rest of the world is facing. So in that sense, yes, comparing Sweden and Denmark is potentially meaningless. However, as long as these numbers are the numbers that policymakers are making decisions on, they're very much meaningful, because these are the numbers that the politicians will be using, and the leaders of the countries will be using to make decisions, right? So to say that these numbers are meaningless is probably silly, because these numbers are what will be used to justify certain decisions or arguing against others. So what can we say so far? So far, it looks like the cases are starting to shrink in Sweden. So looks like the worst is hopefully behind. We're also seeing that the effective mortality was going up quite a bit, and now it's starting to shrink down. Whether this is because the Swedish doctors are getting better at treating the disease, whether the system has become more efficient, it's hard to know. Again, these numbers, it'll probably take months before we can look at these numbers and really put the context around them. But again, as we're looking at these things daily, we're looking for tidbits to try to understand, okay, is there is there some obvious questions we should be asking right now? And so far, Sweden gets a lot of flack for the high deaths. Again, comparing to Norway and comparing to Denmark, I really don't think that this is a fair comparison. These countries of Norway and Denmark are much smaller. Again, we don't know how these numbers are calculated, what's being counted. So I think it'd be very unfair to compare Sweden with Norway and Denmark with respect to deaths and other things. I think plus let's not forget that if Sweden is successful once they come out of this, hopefully they will have herd immunity and they will not have to worry about the subsequent phases. Also, let's not forget that shutting down the economy puts extreme strain on population and causes a variety of deaths from other factors. So it's hard to have a model. Deaths from this disease is just one of the variables. And I don't think anybody has put together a model complex enough to account for suicides, depressions, domestic violence, mental health issues, all kinds of stuff that comes when the country is going through depressions, recessions, economic slowdowns, isolations, and other things. So I think it's really unfair to focus on one variable in this, and as we try to understand if Swedish strategy is a good one or not. As time goes by, as the next couple of days, I'll be watching. So what would I be watching the next couple of days, right? So what's interesting about Sweden was that the mortality rates were very low early on when the cases were low. So there is something I'll be watching to see if mortality drops to the early levels as the cases come down. Because this is what I'm really trying to understand, is this relationship between mortality and utilization of the healthcare system, right? So what is that breaking point? I will do another video when I'll be looking at Italy and Spain, because looking at it rationally, by just looking at the data that's available, things just simply don't make sense. And I'm not even going to talk about China, where things just don't make sense, period, right? So for Sweden, when we see things that are in green early on, becoming red, when things are getting bad, again, this is kind of rational, logical. We would expect this sort of dynamics. What I would want to see is, as cases start coming down over the next several days, it would be interesting to see, and I'm hoping that effective mortality will go down, because this is how I would expect those two variables to be correlated with each other. In conclusion, I'm hoping that we will see dramatic reduction of new cases in Sweden, which would indicate that Sweden is very close to getting herd immunity over the next several days, and which would mean that Sweden hopefully will be positioned pretty well not to worry about this disease as much as the rest of the world come October. And actually, I'm somewhat also happy for Denmark and Norway, because when that fall time comes, they won't have to worry about as much new infections coming from Sweden, because Sweden by then would not be a major risk factor for them. So let's keep watching Sweden. I'm hoping things will get better and better and better every day. And please come again in the next couple of days, as I'll be posting more videos with analysis of other countries, and also analysis of recovery rates, because I don't think the numbers that countries report with respect to recovered patients are very accurate. Thanks. Bye-bye.